We will be drawing a Luna Moth image today, which you, I'm sure, have seen in the preview email. Okay, so since we're a few minutes after 10, I'm just going to get started, and those who drop in, I will catch up. So this is what our starting background will be. I will go through it with you guys, but I just wanted you to see this will kind of be an abstract background for what we're doing today. So I'm going to set mine aside for a moment, but I will get my blank sheet of paper. And also, if you don't want to do this pre-painted background, you can use a sheet of black paper or blue paper and just draw on top of that too. But for now, what I'm going to do is get a tube of blue paint and sort of, this is a sepia, but a dark brown, and we're going to mix those together to kind of tone that blue color into a deeper value. So I'm going to put some blue paint down on my palette. And just a little bit of that dark brown. We don't need too much because it's pretty powerful. And I'm going to use somewhat of a larger brush for this so we can get big strokes of color. I'm going to start, I'm also using acrylic gouache, but you could use whatever paint you have. I think acrylic or watercolor is a good base for this. I wouldn't use oil or anything that takes a long time to dry. We want a quick drying thing here. So I'm just making some like very liquidy blue right now. Adding a lot of water, and I'm going to go in and just add a touch of that brown. And you also don't have to do the color mixing. You could do straight blue or even just black. What we want is a dark color. It could even be a purple or something like that. And I'm going to mix up a lot of this paint because we're going to cover this kind of whole area. So once you have a color that you're happy with, I kind of like mine, I've toned that blue down a little bit. Although I will need a little bit more. I think I'm going to just make up a good quantity. Once we have a lot of paint ready to go, I'm going to start at the top left corner and kind of work my way down. And we're just going to make big kind of abstract looping shapes like this and just keep going that brush around in kind of a figure 8 motion. Refill your brush when it runs out of paint and just keep going across the page like that. They'll overlap. You can kind of see the strokes will start to bleed into each other. I've kind of got that top section. I'm going to start below and keep overlapping those kind of loopy strokes. And this part's always kind of fun. You can just kind of play, make whatever kind of marks you want to make. It's just about getting a nice, fun background. All right, I'm starting on the bottom section. And you can see I didn't mix up quite enough paint, so I'm mixing as I go again here. And also, once we get to this bottom section, if you're doing those looping patterns, you might notice it doesn't stay round at the bottom. So I kind of complete that figure 8. So the bottom will be rounded too. You can see I kind of left a gap here, which could be fine, but I just want to even that out a little. I'm going to add some more up here. Keep it going. You can always go back and edit whatever areas you want a little more paint or a different shape. Okay, so that's kind of our background. I'm sure everyone's looks unique to your hand, which is awesome. I love that everyone will have their very own style for this part. And I'm just going to clean my brush off for right now so that paint doesn't dry into it, because we're going to let this dry before we get back into paint. And when we're cleaning brushes, I usually just dab it on the paper towel until all the color is gone. In between painting sessions, that is. When you're finally done with your brush, you should do so. And while this dries, because it's probably a little wet for everyone, it still is for me, I'm gonna set it aside. And I'm gonna take a piece of scrap paper, and I just wanna show you some of the broad shapes and the general organization of what we'll be painting on top of the blue, so that when we go into that, we'll be kind of, our hands will be ready, so we say. So I'm just gonna take, you know, a regular pencil. This is just practice. We're drawing the Luna moth and a persimmon tree, as well as the caterpillar of the Luna moth today. So for a Luna moth, the general structure, we all know it's kind of like a butterfly. It kind of, there's like this easy curve like this. That's the general shape at the top of the Luna moth. And then the body, it kind of has a large fluffy body. It's about this big. And, you know, I draw some floofy in there. And it has rather large wings. The top ones are larger than the bottom ones, or wider rather. I'm going to curve those down and then kind of connect that with another curve that kind of mirrors the top one, but goes in right here. Same thing on the other side. And then the head of the Luna moth will just barely peek out on top. You don't actually see the eyes or anything when you're seeing them from this angle. So it's kind of just this little lump here, but you can see these feathery antennae. Two of them. And they have these little hairs coming off the sides on both sides of that. There's the central line. And then how I usually do that to make sure those two sides stay the same, I draw that two guiding lines on the side. Kind of looks like a leaf at this point. And then I'll antenna protrusions on the side, and it just meets that guiding line. They have very interesting lower wings. From this point, they look a little bit normal. They have this kind of not sharp edge, but it comes in quite a bit here at the bottom. And then here at the lower end, they actually have these little tails. And does anyone have any ideas about why that's helpful for them, these little tails?
Scary.
They actually are helpful in evading bats. And they move more in the wind than the rest of the butterfly, and it kind of distracts the bats, and they will usually get the tails before the main part of the butterfly. So it's kind of the other main thing I want to highlight with the Luna moth structurally are these eye spots that they have on both sets of wings, which kind of come out in a little like curly Q shape like that, starting at the base of the wing. And then about in the middle section here, they'll come down. And they have smaller ones as well here on the lower wings. That's the basic structure, just practice while our paint dries on the other sheet. And the other two parts I just want to show you very quickly or three parts rather, are the persimmon fruits, the leaves, and the caterpillar. So this is generally what a persimmon fruit looks like. They kind of look like tomatoes in shape, and they have these kind of curly, hardy leaves on top, like that. And they come off the branches of the tree about as so. And that's just practice. They'll be orange, coarse green leaves. There are multiple kinds of persimmons. We will be drawing Fuyu persimmons today, which are also my favorite ones to eat. Persimmons are also delicious. These are what the leaves will look like. They are, you know, pretty generally what an ideal leaf looks like. We don't have to go too crazy with them. And then the caterpillars are very plump fellows. They kind of look like this, and they are bright green. You know, one leg per segment. And they're very large, and they have like a light white stripe down the side like that. And we're not doing color right now, but just so you know when we get there. Okay, now I think that's good practice. The adults do not feed at all. Their only purpose is to others. All right, so I have my pre-painted blue out again. You should get yours too. The next thing we're gonna do is, hopefully this should be dry. If it's not all the way dry, that's okay. We're just gonna be going into it with a bit of white paint right now. Is painting the silhouettes of all those things we just practiced drawing, so they really stand out on top of this blue. So get your white paint. Sorry, mine's a little out of frame, but we're not doing any color mixing with this paint, so I'm going to water it down just a little bit, but not too much, because we want it to be opaque. We want it to stand out over that blue. But we also don't want it to be too thick, because we will then be going over it with colored pencil. And you can do some tests on the side if you want to figure out what the right consistency of paint will be. But for now, let's just try this technique out. So I have my white paint loaded. I'm going to start with the Luna Moth, because that's the main character in this illustration. And I'm going to choose to place it about here. It's kind of going to be not truly in the center, a little on the side. And I'm going to start with that, if you remember, drawing out this top curve of the wings in that nice, easy curving shape, pretty wide. And if it's helpful for you to have your practice sheet next to you like this, so you can look at the shape and imagine where your paint is going to be, that is also a good idea. So I'm just blocking in the entire shape of that Luna Moth. I'm going to start like we started with the sketch, with just the two top wings. And you don't have to be perfect in this stage, because it's only a silhouette. It's only the underpainting, really, for the color that we're going to put in. And I'm going to put in that body, just going right over that paint at the top. Oops. Get that shape of the lower wing. Remember, it comes in a little bit sharply. And that beautiful little tail. I like to do that with just one stroke. I noticed I made this wing, see how it's a little farther out? I'm just going to correct that a little bit, make it come in closer to the body. Because insects are all about symmetry. Next, that little tiny bump for the head. Remember, it doesn't come out too far. And for the antenna, because it's this whole shape, I'm just going to paint this whole leaf shape. I'm not even going to worry about those little feathering branches just yet. And you can use a smaller brush as well if you want for this part. I know it's a little bit of a small area. Like that. Okay, next, so we have that laid in. I think next I want to put down the branch of leaves, which is also where the caterpillar will be. Since, oh, and I forgot to mention, we're painting them with persimmons because that is one of the trees that the caterpillar feeds on. It's not random. I believe south of North Carolina, they choose the persimmon trees over the other available options. So I'm going to have this branch with leaves coming up like this. So I'm going to just drop in a line quickly, which will be our guide for where that branch will be. I'm going to drag that all the way to the edge of that blue. And then I think one leaf. And again, just painting that silhouette, easy leaf shape. Connect that to the end of the branch. Like that. That actually looks a little small to me. So I'm going to make it a little bit larger. And I'm going to do that 3 more times on this branch. They're just going to come out that little stem as a guide. 2. And then 1 on the top here. And I'm going to leave a space here for the caterpillar. So kind of cluster them more towards the front of that branch. One more leaf. And I'm going to make this one kind of a side view of the leaf. So what I'm going to do is just paint a straight line out. Well, not straight, but a lightly curved line out from this stem. And then do like a half moon shape and fill that in. Okay, next is that chunky caterpillar. Look at my practice guide. It's kind of in segments, so you could even just paint like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 segments all at once, or you could do like individual brush strokes for each one. So I'm going to put him hanging from the bottom of this branch, starting pretty close, but not touching the branch. This will be the head end, so I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And then the next segment, and you can see that's just an oval right now. The next segment will be another oval, just a little bit bigger, coming up higher than that head segment. And just keep going down. Okay. And once I start getting towards the back segments, the last segments of that caterpillar, I'm going to make them start to get smaller again. And the last one will just be a little bit smaller than that head the first segment was. And then once we get there, from every segment but the head, I'm going to drop in a little dot of paint connecting it to the branch for the legs. And here's our caterpillar. Next, let's move to this top portion. We're going to draw in those persimmon silhouettes. Get some more paint on my brush. I'm going to have 2. I'm going to have 1 here. I'm going to have 1 back here. And to try to get a little perspective illusion in here, I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger, this one a little bit smaller. So again, just starting really broadly with that kind of tomato shape of the persimmon up here. And I probably should have also started this one with the branch like we did down here, but I'm just gonna add it in now. It's okay. Just remember it connects kind of at the top of like where that little dip is in the persimmon. And it's gonna come out a little further. Like that. And then that leaf, I'm just gonna, there's not too much adding to the silhouette, but I just want to poke it up a little bit so we have some dimension. And then the second persimmon, again, I'm going to make it a little smaller and at a different angle. And this branch should also be at a slightly different angle. I think if it's tilted this way, it might come down sort of like this. And then this leaf I'll make stick up a little bit more. Have some diversity. Okay, great. And if you want to add a few more leaves to these ones up here, that would be a nice composition too. You know, I might even make like a leaf coming out of the side here. I'm gonna follow that edge, face beyond the borders of our image this way. Maybe I'll add a leaf up here. Yeah. Okay, so now we have the bones of our composition laid out. The paint for your Luna Moth should be close to dry, depending on how thickly you laid it down. Is anyone's white paint not totally dry on the Luna Moth? Okay, that's no problem. I think that if your paint is a little bit dry, we don't want to go into it too hard with the colored pencils yet, because it will kind of mix together and maybe damage your paper. So if your paint's still a little dry, what you can do is practice your color on the sketch sheet that we did, and then once your paint is dry, go back in there and just lay it on top. It's another good reason to have a practice page. Okay, so now we are pretty much done with the brush. I'm going to clean it off and then fully clean it after we're done. And set that aside. I'm going to get my colored pencils. And what I'm going to be using today is mostly greens and then oranges and a little bit of brown for the persimmon. And if you have some red, that's good too. Also purple, because there are purple highlights on this Luna Moth. Okay, so let's start with that moth. I have this light green that I'm going to be using. And actually, I might throw in some yellow too, because this green is a little bit cool, and I want to make sure we get that luminosity with the Luna Moth. So what I'm going to do is first, remember that eye spot. I'm going to mark out where that should be. And you know what? I'm actually going to do that in purple because those kind of have a purple tinge. So let's start doing that. by putting some purple all along the top edge of this wing. Depends on what kind of colored pencils you have. Pastel pencils would also be a really good tool for this because those go down nice and easy. Okay. It's not showing up too well on my camera, but hopefully you can see that. So let's get that top purple edge down. And then once we do that, let's remember that curly Q shape. Oh. Really, also, you could probably use crayon for this, or even more paint. You could use like any kind of color you want. And the next purple, remember that eye spot on the lower leaf? I'm just going to draw in that circle. And I'm not totally filling in these eye spots because the center of them is not purple. It's actually got a little bit of yellow in there. But I just want to make sure that we know where they will be on the paper. And then the last purple highlight on these guys is along that outer edge of the lower wing. Not all the way down, but kind of where that first curve of the tail starts to come out. And now I will pick up that green again, and we're just going to color in that whole wing section, except for where the middle of the eye spot is, the green. Totally. Watercolors is a little hard for this. Well, yeah, and I mean, you could use any materials that really work for you. Less about the specific material than just learning to put things together, you know? Yeah. Oh. So now you can see, because we put that kind of light layer down, this color is just really popping against that blue. And we're going to leave that body white. They have a really bright white fuzzy body. Coloring around that. And once you finish the top wings, go ahead and do the same thing to the bottom wings. Are most of y'all in the New York area right now? Mm-hmm. We will be making greeting cards featuring the monarch butterfly that are not holiday specific. They're really for any kind of occasion, but sorry, I'm switching to a darker green right now. And sorry to interrupt that, to add a little bit of shadow under the top wing. But back to the monarch workshop, the cards will be highlighting the relationship between milkweed and monarch butterflies. I'm gonna hold this up so you guys can see. I'm adding this green here and kind of making a little bit of a shadow element underneath that top wing with a darker green. Wow, that did a lot. That really made it glow with that white paint. Okay, and then I'm gonna go in with that yellow that I mentioned. Just go in not too hard to start, but over some of those areas of the lighter green. Just pretty lightly. I just want to add a little yellow tone. And then on the inside also of that eye spot, I'm not doing the whole thing. It's just like a little upside down moon following that purple curlicue. on all 4 of those. And then that other yellow piece will be the antenna, which I'm just going to color that whole thing to start, that whole leaf shape for the antenna. And we can go back in there with a darker color, and then I'm using a blue because we have a blue background. Draw in those little feathery detail shapes on top. Oh, and then one purple thing I forgot to tell you guys is just the top of the body right here. We had this purple that goes all the way across the top of the wings. There's also a little collar on the top of the body between the head that is purple. So I'm gonna kind of make that white or a light colored pencil too. That could be good for to add some fuzz into that body shape. I'm just doing a little like zigzag, adding fur on top of the white paint. And you can also use this if you want to draw in like the wing veins, which gets a little hard once you lay down so much colored pencil to add more colored pencil on top of it. You have to press really hard to make that show up. But you can also use white paint, or a white, like a gel pen would also work. Actually, that would be, and those will just kind of branch out from the base of the wing to the edges. Okay, great. And if you feel like you want to keep working on this after, you could use that white color pencil and add like highlights on the tail to add some dimension. There's a lot you can do with it. Really pull out that bottom edge like this. But for now, we're going to move on to the leaves. And this is going to be similar. I'm going to use those 2 greens again. Let me sharpen this light one. And how we're going to do this is kind of divide each leaf in half. I'm just drawing a line to guide right now. And that curve is going to follow this curve of the leaf. It's not going to be a straight line. That will make the perspective look a little bit strange. I'm going to do that on all of these. Kind of divide them in half, following the curve of the whole leaf. And except for the half one, what I'm going to do for that is divide it almost in half, but not quite. Following, again, that same curve. And then I drew one up here too, I guess, to do those. Okay, so now take that light green. We're going to color in half of the leaf from that line that we drew, not the whole leaf. Do that for all of them. And I'm going to color in the top half of each one, so there's some consistency. And if your leaf is kind of standing up like this and there's not really a top half, I would just think about which way you think the light is coming from in your image, and whichever side would be hit by the light, color that in. And for this side leaf, I'm going to color the bottom half in, because the underside of leaves are usually a bit lighter than the top. Okay, now with that darker green, I'm gonna go in and do the other half, and I'm going kind of light for this one because this is a pretty dark green and I don't want it to totally disappear against that blue background. I think I'll probably go in and add a little bit more of that light green on top of it after we get this kind of shadow color laid in. Anyone have questions so far or comments on those leaves? Although up north in New York, it's usually let me check my notes. It's more common that it's different tree. My notes, I have the white birch is the more common host in the north. Okay, so now I'm laying in just the lighter green on top of that darker green. I just want there to be a little bit of difference in how those two sides of the leaves are coming off. This side is much lighter touch with the colored pencil. Okay, back to that dark green. You can also use a brown or a blue even could look really cool. Maybe I'll do that on some of them. I'm gonna have both of those out. We're going to put down those veins on the leaves just right over that color, and it's gonna meet that center line where those two spaces are. And I'm just gonna make it come down like pretty regularly. This is kind of a stylized version of these trees. But if you're familiar with persimmons, please go crazy with the detail. Just like that. Fun fact about Putnam moths and most moths in general. Sometimes the males and females look very different from the wing pattern, and you can tell pretty easily. But a lot of the times they look relatively similar. So the way that you can tell them apart is the males will have bigger antennae because they use those to seek out the females. They're a little more feathery. So for this side view leaf, what I did is I drew the veins up only on the inside. And then on the underside, I would go in with a lighter color pencil and not connect them from the center line with those veins on the inside of the leaf that I drew, but they're going to kind of come off this back edge at a different angle. They're going to come up like this. And they won't connect at all with those dark green veins that I drew. They're going to kind of be staggered. And they're all branching off from the same, almost where the stem is. It's like a curved line coming up. Finish up these veins. I'm moving a little quickly because I know that our hour's almost up. Next, I'm gonna do those twigs, which are pretty quick. We can just lay in some brown. This is a regular like sepia. Burnt umber would be good. And what would be very beautiful if you did a combination of like a dark brown and a burnt sienna. And for the persimmon twigs, I'm just going to draw that line straight over the silhouette of the persimmon. Since they're hanging off those twigs. Oops. Leaned in my blue paint, so I don't get it on the rest of my picture. Okay. Yeah, so since I don't have that burnt sienna colored pencil out with me, I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow because I do want a little bit of a warm tone in those branches. And then even some red to get as close as I can to just really light with the red. I just want to imagine that I'm adding that burnt sienna. Okay. Next is that caterpillar, which is that very, very bright green. So we're going to do the same color combo as the Luna moth, but we're going to add more yellow. So also remember that white stripe down the side. We want to leave that blank of colored pencil so that white paint can go through. So what I'm going to do is actually draw that first, so I remember, and it's going to kind of follow the curve of those body segments. So I'm actually drawing kind of a squiggly path, 2 squiggly lines down the center of that caterpillar body, and then coloring around that path. Those feet. Okay. Next, going with that yellow, I'm going to go a little harder than I did on the butterfly, or the moth, I'm sorry. So it's just a bit of a brighter green. And I'm going to come in with that light white colored pencil and just heighten that stripe down the side. And maybe even add a little to where the face would be. And then if you want to add like some darker green shading like in between where the body segments are, that could also be a nice addition here. Yeah, kind of outlined that head segment. It's like half of that first segment we drew. Just outlined it a bit. Cephalized creature. All right, you know what? Let's knock our greens out of the park. Let's do the last green thing, the leaves on those persimmons. If you remember, they're kind of this like funny flat leaf with a little curl. They're very hardy and tough. If you see them in the store, if you buy persimmons in the store, you have to like crack them off. So I'm gonna just draw that shape out inside of that silhouette we drew. It curves up a little towards the right. You can see that. Color that whole thing in. So it peeks out above the main body of the fruit. Connects at the branch. And then this one, the second leaf is kind of on the other side of the persimmon. So I'm gonna let that curve of this whole fruit continue itself and just color above that, like this. So this whole line of the persimmon is continuing just above that line. I'm going to color green. And this one back here, I did not draw a leaf in front of the branch. There's only that receding leaf behind. So I'm going to let this shape of the persimmon remain, color above that. But if you had a leaf planned here in front as well, go for it. And for these leaves, I'm actually going to use a little bit of brown for the shading to differentiate them from the other leaves. And I'm not going to draw a vein pattern. I just want to emphasize that shape. And they're not truly leaves either. That's just the word that I'm using as sort of a common language. They're actually the leftover sepals from the flower, because flowers are what turn into fruit and the sepals remain. That's the bottom of the flower. Once they're pollinated, they turn into the fruit. Those sepals remain. They're not true leaves. They're actually a flower part that's left over. So I want them to look a bit different from these leaves. So I'm going to use that darker color, brown in this case, to just outline that edge of the leaf. I drew in a little shadow on this side. I'm going to put in just a little bit of modular shadow in the center, and maybe on this edge. Make it look like it's curving a bit. And just pretty minimal shadow on this back one, these back ones here, just to make it look like it's curving around a little. Great, now we can move on to our beautiful persimmon moons. You could also have a yellow ready, a red if you want to add in a little bit of shadow and vibrance. But we're going to start by just coloring this whole persimmon orange, but we might want to think about the light source. Even if it's the moon, there's still some sort of a light source. And you could leave a little white spot wherever that direction is coming from. I wouldn't make it too big or too sharply edged, because this isn't a daylight scene. But you know, I'm going to leave a little lighter area here, shade it out, the edges of it. And I chose to call this workshop Luna Moth and Persimmon Moons just purely for poeticism, because I had the composition with the persimmons kind of at the top of the night sky that we have, and they look a little bit like moons or lanterns hanging there. Same thing on this smaller one. Leave just a little bit of white in there in that top corner. Soft edge. Wow, that orange really does a lot because we have so much green in this image. Contrasting color really kind of pops everything else, especially against the blue, since those are complementary colors. It's a nice contrast. Okay, so there's our basic persimmon color. I'm gonna go in with that yellow, like I mentioned, and you know, I actually have this Tuscan red, which is a nice, I think, modulated red. It's a little It's a little cooler, less severe than a regular red. And I'm gonna add some yellow on top of the orange. Kind of deepen that hue. And I kind of like the way that I have the paint a little bit thinner, the white paint underneath it. So when you add like this warm color on top of it, it really kind of dulls that really bright orange and yellow just a little bit, because we have a layer of blue underneath it kind of absorbing light. So it makes it look a little bit more like you're looking at something at night. There's not that saturated light coming through. Night light. Okay, now I have the Tuscan red. If you have a regular red, that's fine. You could also, get creative, use even a purple would be an interesting shading choice for this. But we're gonna be, we're gonna start light with this because I don't want it to get too red because it will look like a tomato. And I'm just gonna pay attention to those areas of shadow. If the light was coming this way, like we talked about, it's going to be on the opposite side of that highlight. So just kind of on the edge, shading that out, keeping it nice and soft. And then I make the shading area a little bit thinner down here at the base of the fruit to emphasize that curve. And a bit wider up here, especially if it's under this branch, there would be a little more shadow. Just draw it up just a little behind the branch. And I'm not going to go all the way around the persimmon for this. I'm just going to let that area up by the highlight live in its little orange self, not get too much red. And if you want to go in like under the leaf, you could add a little there too. That's even a little red, so I'm going to add just a little bit of brown. And maybe even a little bit of blue into that shadow. Just really lightly, not pressing hard at all for this. Now for small one, same thing. Paying attention to where that light source is. Very light hand. Also paying attention to shadow source of the branch as well as the light source. That's something to think about. Okay, there's our basic picture. There's a lot, I think, with this method. You could keep going in and filling with things. You could go in again with that paint like we talked about. I might even do that for these veins here really quick. My paint is still wet, so I might as well use it. I kind of have a guide with the colored pencil already, so I'm just gonna do really thin lines with that light paint. Also add a highlight inside of those eye spots, which, just like the tails, that's another defense mechanism against predators, is those eye spots look like eyes. That's why they're called eye spots, and it makes it seem like the Luna moth is a much bigger creature that maybe you don't want to eat. that other side. I always find it helpful when you're doing these kind of curving lines, especially with paint, to turn your page the way that makes sense for your particular right or left-handedness. So you're not contorting your body all over. You'll get a much smoother line. And then on the lower wings, these veins will come out like this. They're not going to follow exactly the curve of this tail because that's an extra thing that this moth has. If you imagine a regular moth or butterfly without those tails, the veins will just kind of go in a similar arcing pattern to the top wing. Little highlights down here. The white paint. We're a little bit over time, so I can hang on for a few minutes if anyone has questions or if I was moving too quickly. But that's the basics for this technique. I think that you can do a lot of really cool stuff with it. It's a helpful way to think about how you can use layering to create a different sense, and also like it's an easier way to get that like a nice even background behind whatever you're drawing instead of going around and coloring everything. That takes more time. Also going to go in with this white paint into this persimmon highlight. Make that pop. I know about that. That's very good information. Please share. Also, thank you for mentioning that it's actually called the calyx. I realized that I said sepal. Thank you. Yes, so I will be having a few more workshops in November with the Wodorowski Foundation, but we also are doing a whole pollinator series, which you can find on the website. And of course, if you're on this email list, I'm sure you will get those invites as well, but please reach out to us if you want to find out what those dates are. There's other artists teaching, there's different it's not all drawing and painting workshops. There's building some pollinator homes and things like that. So I'd be really excited to see some of you there if you'd like to join.